got so much to talk about, yet so little ability to do so. But because I'm gonna have to make do with a separate spoiler-filled discussion about this movie, enjoying my spoiler-free review of Iron Man 3. Tony Stark and his alter ego Iron Man returns, and this time he's facing even darker, more complex and troublesome inner demons, along with a new foe, the Mandarin, who's threatening to take away everything, including the stuff that he values the most. That car is probably one of them. From its opening frame to the amazing end credits, this movie infrequently but subtly and effectively reminds you that this is directed by Shane Black. If you guys don't know who he is, he directed Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, also with Robert Downey Jr., and he also wrote, I believe, the first two. I can't remember about 3 or 4, and I might even be wrong about 2, but he definitely wrote the first Lethal Weapon. And throughout the movie, he throws in some of his Shane Black-isms, like, the fact that this movie, as like the majority of his movies takes place on Christmas time. Like I said, some of the characters with their dialogue is very much, reminiscent of his older films. And some of those things work, yet some just feel like, they get lost in the mist. So eventually, Shane Black, it's almost like Shane Black literally says, yeah, I have to remind myself I'm directing Iron Man 3, so I can't incorporate every single tiny detail that I have put in my other movies. So as the movie goes along, it kind of forgets that and just says, you know what, I'm making a summer blockbuster film. That's what it's gonna be. That minor gripe aside, this movie succeeds on so many levels, it's ridiculous. And because of that, I feel like I have to restrain myself so much that I don't want to ruin it for you guys. I know the movie just barely came out, so I really want to withhold as much information as possible so you guys can have the best experience possible witnessing this movie. Now, is it the greatest blockbuster of all time? No, not necessarily. There are some problems, but they're very scarce and they're almost very minimal. So this movie is very easy to enjoy, and it's very easy to say that this is indeed a rather sizable step up from Iron Man 2. Do I pit it over Iron Man? I gotta be honest, I don't know. I think they're almost neck and neck. It's like, two very tall pins. It's almost like a 7-10 split when you're bowling. You got the 7 and the 10, but in the middle you got nothing. And, well, I'm not gonna say that Iron Man 2 was nothing. I actually thought that it was a good comic book movie, but it wasn't the great sequel or at least the better sequel that we were hoping for. It really wasn't. Iron Man 3 fixes its problems and just wraps around as a whole. It pretty much is the Dark Knight Rises of the Iron Man trilogy, and of course it does touch on some of the some familiar themes, some familiar tones, like taking away and a whole lot of essence of our superhero and making him into more of a man, and because he's a man, he's gonna have to rise to the occasion. And yeah, this movie spends a great deal doing that. There's a portion, not to get into too much detail, but there's a portion where you see less Iron Man and more of Tony Stark. But that's not entirely a bad thing. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Now, does that mean that I would love to stay there and spend more time with Tony Stark? No, I would really love to see some badassery. And fortunately, that is what we get in its climax. Say what you will about Iron Man 2. The one thing that you can agree on that all 3 Iron Man movies have is a very cinematic, sparkly, visually amazing, and overall badass climax. Now, I'll agree, the first 2 movies did have a very, very short climax, despite how amazing it was to look at. Here, they correct that problem immensely. Not only does it end the movie on a high note, but it's practically worth watching the movie all over again just for that climax. But on top of righting the wrong of having a longer climax, it righted several other wrongs that the previous first 2 films, mainly the second film, had. Like, for example, some of the side characters. I'm not going to mention who because I don't want you to speculate too much until my spoiler discussion of the movie. But there were some characters that have been in the other movies that were just there for either comic relief or just to have some form of convenience for Tony Stark. Here they actually do something and you go, wow, that was effective. I love how you handled that character, and it was amazing. Tony Stark himself is even more complex than has been before, and it's easier to latch onto him because in the first Iron Man, of course, we were rooting for him all the way by the end of the movie. In Iron Man 2, they kind of receded back to the point where it's almost like he never went through that experience in the cave in Afghanistan, and it felt very poor, and we wanted him to be that character that he was at the end of Iron Man, but instead he receded back to being that billionaire playboy, and even worse, getting drunk while wearing the suit, which is completely hazardous. Here they add an element that brings him down back to Earth, and on top of that, gets stripped away of his powers, his technology, almost everything, and so he has to rely on himself to actually get out of the situation and to like I said, rise to the occasion and be the hero that he was aspiring to be, but this time from within himself. And I love that. And you end up rooting for him the same way you ended up rooting for him at the very end of the first Iron Man. So again, we have come back full circle. Several things were confirmed prior to the release of the movie. They were saying that despite the fact that the trailers were making it seem like this was going to be a way more serious, darker Iron Man, it really is. And they did say at the before the release of the movie, Shane Black himself said, yeah, I mean, there's some dark, or at least some more complex tones, such as Tony Stark himself and what he's dealing with, but the movie's not going to be dark. It's still going to have plenty of humor, and it does, and the majority, in fact, about a good 90% of the humor was indeed funny and charming. And on top of that, it still withstands that light tone that Shane Black likes to incorporate in some of his black comedies, and along with that, it also has some of that humor that Marvel movies tend to have, like the slight, I don't want to say slapstick, but like the things that you would see, that sort of fish out of water kind of jokes, or at least just the typical humor that you would see in a summer blockbuster movie, but the type that doesn't make you roll your eyes like, oh my god, it's this joke again. No, it's the kind of joke that you are welcome to, and you go, huh, that was funny. Okay, action. And another thing that they confirmed is that this is not at all going to ignore the events that happened in the Avengers, and they did that well without, fisting in all of these Easter eggs and, visual gags or references to the Avengers like they did with Iron Man 2. Here, they went as subtle as possible. In fact, the only references that you hear are vocal. You hear a certain character mention or make a reference to Thor. You hear a certain character make a reference to the Chitauri that appeared in New York. In fact, without giving too much away, one of Tony Stark's complex issues has to do with with some of the things that happened at the very end of the Avengers. So it's very nice that they did not ignore the events of the Avengers. Like, it would have been easy to ignore it, but at the same time, it wouldn't have made any sense. So I'm glad that they did it very subtly without throwing it at our face. Now, it isn't perfect. Like I said, some of Shane Black's personal touches didn't exactly work for me. I mean, they weren't terrible. They could have done, this movie could have been done without them. Like the fact that this movie takes place during Christmas. And, it felt a little like, hey, it's a Shane Black movie, so it has to take place during Christmas. So we have to put Christmas in there. Could have done without it. One or two characters are literally in the movie for like one scene, and I'm like, okay, I remember reading a lot of articles that this certain actor was going to be in the movie, and I'm like, oh cool, I wonder what character he'll play, and they ended up being in one scene towards the beginning. And I'm like, okay, what was the point of that? There were also some really minor plot holes. In fact, they're almost not even holes. They're more like punctures in the plot, and because they're really that small, like some slight conveniences, like, okay, how did that end up there, or a particular, I'm gonna keep quiet after I say this, but let's just say that Tony does something at the very end of the movie, not gonna say what it is, but it raised a big question mark in me. I'll get to it in my spoiler discussion, but it did make me question something that made me go, why? But as a whole, it is not only one of the best summer movies of this year, it is also one of the best movies of the year so far, period. And it is definitely a satisfying wraparound, not gonna say conclusion, but a wraparound to this Iron Man trilogy, because there's no denying that this movie doesn't cancel out the possibility of an Iron Man 4 later on in the future, possibly in Phase 3 of the the Avengers Initiative, if you will. But it does come full circle with this original Iron Man 3 trilogy, and it does a great service to both Iron Man and Iron Man 2, despite the fact of how you may feel about Iron Man 2. I give Iron Man 3 a 9.2 out of 10, which is an A-. I'd say Phase 2 has initiated with an outstanding start. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to check out my channel for more reviews. Subscribe for more reviews. Follow me on Twitter at DarkSpiderDavid. And as always, take care. See you guys next time. Oh yeah, and